We discussed that passage to some degree last Sunday morning, and it serves as a good introduction for this evening. The passage is often cited to highlight the difference between the decision that a person makes and wanting to be a disciple. It's a difficult decision, but there are things to consider. As the text points out, is a person willing to put Jesus first, even ahead of himself? Is he willing to put Jesus first ahead of his family? Is he willing to take up his cross and follow Jesus? Well, that determination must be made. But we would like to talk about someone who lived about 1,500 years before Jesus came to this earth, and that is Moses. We'd like to take a look at a decision which Moses made, similar to what we're talking about, but of course it did not imply following Christ, but rather God at that time. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 11 and begin reading with verse 24. Hebrews chapter 11, you'll recall, is a chapter where many heroes of the faith are listed, and Moses is included. Hebrews 11:24, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith he passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. First of all, we want to notice the means by which Moses was able to accomplish all of these things. You probably noticed in verse 24, 27, 28, and 29 that it includes the phrase, by faith. He was able to accomplish all these things because of the faith in God that he had. His faith caused him to take action. He did not sit around muttering, I'm not going to do anything because someone might think that I'm trying to be saved by my works. You know, you hear that kind of thinking today in the world, and it really makes no sense. The fact is that faith causes somebody to take action. It doesn't just give them a right to sit around in a chair meditating and saying, I believe the truth, therefore I'm saved. No, faith causes someone to take action, to do something. All of these heroes of the faith that we find in Hebrews chapter 11, it is said that they did something. There's not any verse there that said they sat around talking about how wonderful it was to be a believer. They acted. They did something because of their faith in God. Now, we want to deal with that phrase, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. One option in Moses' choice was to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. The elegance of the royal court would have been his to enjoy if he had chosen that option. He might have attended many state dinners. He might have greeted ambassadors from all over the world. Probably he would not have been Pharaoh, since Pharaoh had a son, but he might have been one of the royal advisors. At least he would have had a luxurious inheritance with fame and fortune, power, prestige, preeminence, prominence. He would have had all those things. And he might have had more. He might have had victory with some great battles that he was in charge of. Or, at the very least, he would have had servants and all the best of the wealth that the upper echelon of society had always been able to enjoy. Now think about all those things that he could have had if he had chosen to be the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He would have enjoyed all the passing pleasures of the world, things that people want, people kill for, people fraudulently take advantage of others in order to obtain. He could have had all of these just by virtue of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Like Solomon, he could have had wealth, great wealth. He could have had all the entertainment that Egypt had to offer. He could have had the highest knowledge available to him, and perhaps his own harem. Now, how many people would give all that up for something else? Well, what was the other choice? Because we do read that Moses chose to do something else, what could possibly prove to be a serious competitor of all the pleasures of the world that he could have had? Well, here's the other choice: suffering affliction with the people of God. Really? That's it? That's the choice? Most people probably wouldn't need to think over about a second and a half as to which one of those they would prefer: to be the son of Pharaoh's daughter and have all that the world has to offer, or to suffer affliction with the people of God. So that's the choice. For Moses, the pot was probably a little sweeter than it is for most of us, but still, isn't that essentially the same choice that each one of us has to make in this life? Which direction we want to go? Let's consider what Jesus said. We're going to come back to Hebrews 11, but let's just for a moment wander over to Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. In that text, Jesus says, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life shall lose it. But whoever decides to lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" Moses never heard those words, but he understood what the decision was, didn't he? Moses could have had a large share of the whole world. Why would anyone in his right mind pass up such a thing? He chose to suffer affliction with the people of God. Now, we might ask the question, well, what did Moses know about suffering? His mother had undoubtedly taught him about how he nearly did not even survive his own birth. It was by faith that his parents hid him for 3 months in defiance of the king's command, which is noted just before the passage we read in Hebrews 11 and verse 23. He grew up and he saw the way that the Israelites were treated by the Egyptians. He saw what their lives were like. Both in chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus, we have a description of what that was like. In Exodus chapter 1 and verse 14, we read, "And they," referring to the Egyptians, "made their," that is the Israelites, "lives bitter with hard bondage. In mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field, all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor." It's not like some of the jobs that you see people with today. Was talking this morning about how you see some road crews out or some crew and there's one guy working and the other 5 are standing around watching him. I guess they're there to applaud. I'm not quite sure why they're there. But this was not the kind of job that the Israelites had. They were all workers and they worked with rigor. They worked in bitter bondage. The other passage is Exodus chapter 2 and verse 11. "Shortly thereafter it came to pass in those days that Moses was grown. He went out to see his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren." And so he saw their burdens. He understood what their suffering was about. So he had undoubtedly been taught it, but he saw it for himself firsthand. He tried to help, but he received criticism, not from the Egyptians, but from the Hebrews, his own people, criticized him rather than gave him gratitude for having helped. As much as he would have liked to help, he had to flee instead. But the choice had been made. He had sided with Israel and its miseries rather than with the allurements that Egypt had to offer. Now we might ask, well, how did Moses make this decision? How did he choose the right thing to do? And there are some scriptures that provide some help in answering this. Hebrews chapter 11, 26 and 27 says that he made the right decision, but how? The text does not say this, but it probably is the case that his mother was helpful in making him and teaching him the proper values. She had taught him the truth about who the Israelites were and who Egypt was. She undoubtedly had taught him that idolatry was wrong, but it was right to serve the true and living God. She also might have taught him about fairness and justice as well. So the reproach of Christ refers to what? There are actually several ideas that are presented. One is that it's the same kind of reproach that Jesus suffered, and that makes a certain amount of sense. Reproach suffered on account of Christ. That may be a little hard to fit in, but I think it's accurate as well. Reproach on Moses as a type of Christ, or Christ suffering along with his people. Those are some ideas about what it means to suffer the reproach of Christ. But Hebrews was written to those, to encourage those who were being persecuted, to encourage them not to give up, even in the face of persecution. And had not Jesus taught that in Matthew 5:10 through 12? Did he not say, blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake? Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for so persecuted they the prophets who were before them. You're in good company. And Moses suffered as a result of this decision. It's also the case that Paul says all who will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. But in a sense, taking a stand for God and against the world is standing with Christ, even though it may have occurred centuries before. So, however one of these definitions might fit, and in fact most of them do, the fact is Moses was willing to suffer the reproach of Christ and with his people than to have all that Egypt had to offer. How else was he able to make this decision? He looked to the reward for faithfulness, which is far a greater reward than anything Egypt had to offer. And Jesus did that same thing. If you just look a few verses below where we are in Hebrews 11, notice the first 3 verses of chapter 12. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto whom? Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. That's one way he was able to accomplish that. Despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Moses likewise looked to the reward. He knew there would be a reward for doing what is right. There's a reward for doing what's wrong too, but nobody's going to appreciate having it. It's a reward of a rather negative nature. Jesus and Moses both made the proper decision. You know, Moses gave up all the wealth, riches, and pleasures of Egypt, and Jesus made that same decision because Satan showed him all the kingdoms of the world, all their riches, all their splendor, all their glory, and said, if you'll just bow down and worship me, you can have all of that. Jesus was not interested. God is the only one to be worshiped, not Satan, no matter what he promises. It's probably not his to give away, but he'll promise it anyway. But Jesus resisted. Moses resisted. We need to resist any kind of similar thing, even though to a far lesser degree. We need to endure and look to the reward also. Eternity is forever. Suffering on earth is temporary. Did Moses have to suffer the afflictions with God's people? Absolutely. Many times, over and over again in the wilderness. Did Jesus have to suffer while he was upon the earth? Absolutely. While he was enduring his trial and while he was being put on the cross. He had a great amount to endure. But he did so because he made the right decision to the choice that we all have. Moses, it is said, was able to overcome. Now, Paul says something relevant to that in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18, about suffering and about eternity and about this current time. Paul says, "Therefore we do not lose heart, even though the outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working in us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Now, he may have been talking about personal health problems in that text, but it fits the persecution concept also. That's only temporary. Man can kill the body, but only God can destroy both soul and body in hell, Matthew 10 and verse 28. Moses, it is said, had respect for these things. It would probably interrupt the flow of the context to actually translate that word the way we can look at it. The Greek word is apoblepo, blepo meaning the word to see in the Greek. I don't know of an English derivative, just one of those Greek words. You have to know what it means. So it's to see. Apo means from or away from. Literally, this means to look away from. Had respect to doesn't quite convey the same thing, but the translators are trying to make it make sense for the reader. It means, you might say, well, wait a minute. Moses is looking away from something? Yes, he is. What he's looking away from are things that are not important so that he can focus his eyes on one important thing. That's the sense of what this verb means. So he's not looking away from God. He's not looking away from things that are important. He's looking away from the things that are not important, such as the treasures of Egypt and the control of Egypt, the authority over Egypt. He's looking away from all of those things that don't matter, so he can focus on the one thing that does matter. And in this case, that one thing is the reward that he will receive for having made the correct decision. Now, the fourth thing is, he endured as seeing him who is invisible. He didn't see God at this time in his life. Now, this is long before the burning bush, and being in the cleft of the rock and seeing the back part of God. This is long, many years, decades before that happens. And yet, he endured as seeing God. Now, God is invisible, but he endured as if he had seen him. Moses was convinced of God's existence just as much as if the Lord had knocked on the door and said, "May I come in?" and they had spent an afternoon talking with each other. Now, that didn't happen, of course, but he knows him just as much as if that had happened. We don't know how he knew that. Maybe he knew history. Maybe he knew things that he would write later on, but had not been recorded at this point. Maybe what Paul writes in Romans 1:18 through 20 is what had convinced him. Let's take a look at Romans 1, beginning with verse 18. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." And yes, we have people today who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Sometimes we refer to them as the news media, but there are plenty of people, both spiritually and secularly, who will suppress the truth. They don't want the truth out. They don't want people to know what the truth is. And especially is that true spiritually. Because what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, the invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his internal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. This is the way in which Moses obviously knew God, through the same logical deductions that every person on earth can make. When you step outside, or if you watch something on television with the millions, possibly billions of stars, the galaxies, the vastness of the universe, you kind of have to ask yourself, where'd this all come from? And if you reason properly, you will come to the conclusion that God made it and that it comes from him. Moses was convinced of this truth. So this decision that he made was even before he was ever called to go to Egypt from the burning bush. This same attitude prompted Moses to follow God's instructions concerning the Passover. When God told Moses, I'm going to bring another plague upon Egypt, and if you want to be saved from it, you've got to put blood on the doorposts and the lintel above it. Moses believed it, and they did it. And they were saved as a result of doing that. He was also willing to enter into the sea. You know, some people might have said, that's a nice looking path right through the sea here, but how do we know that water's going to stay up and not come collapsing down on us? Well, he believed that God would deliver Israel, and he did through that means. Now, what about today's choice? People must make the same choice today as what Moses made in this portion of his life. Because there are many people, just because we may not have a tremendously difficult time becoming a Christian does not mean that everyone has that privilege. Today, when a Muslim obeys the gospel and decides to become a Christian, there is a strong possibility that one of his family members will seek him out and put him to death. They do not want anyone leaving the Muslim religion. I remember reading of a Jewish girl a few decades ago in Fort Worth, Texas, who was living at the YWCA because she was disowned by her Jewish parents for embracing Christianity. They wanted nothing more to do with her. A teenage girl in Oklahoma was punished by her mother and made fun of by her peers because she did not have a desire to be popular in a worldly sense. She would not attend the school dances, and she insisted instead on being present for Bible study and worship. And so she received all of this ill treatment as a result of the choice that she had made. It's good that some people make these decisions. How will the world ever get the idea that God is more important than it is when the world demands and receives loyalty but dedication to the church? Well, you know, I have to do this. I can't come. How many times have we all heard that? Which is the most important? What's the decision that has been made? We often sing a song. I gave my life for thee, my precious blood I shed, that thou mightst ransom be and quickened from the dead. Quickened's not a word that we use a lot anymore, but it means made alive. We were dead in sin, but we have been made alive by the blood of Christ. I gave my life for thee. What hast thou given for me? What's the decision? What's the choice that we have made? Or there's another song that we sing, and oh, may this my glory be, my glory be, my glory be, that Christ is not ashamed of me, is not ashamed of me. Should he be? Have we been making the right decisions? Have we been making the right choices? If you have tried to be a Christian and have not left sin, that needs to change. That is a world that should be left behind, just as Moses left it behind when he left Egypt. If you have listened to the call of the world, try very hard not to pay attention to it anymore. If Moses had tried to be both an Egyptian and a Hebrew, he probably would have been despised by both. And so will you. If you try to be worldly and try to be a Christian at the same time, that's not going to work very well. The world won't appreciate it, and the church is not going to appreciate it either. There is a choice that needs to be made in the lives of each one of us as to where we are going to stand. Choose to walk toward the light. The world and everything that Satan offered to Jesus is darkness. It leads nowhere. It's tempting, yes, but it leads nowhere you want to go. Only one way exists to get into Christ, and that's by being baptized into Christ. As Galatians 3:26 and 27 says, "For you are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus, for as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ." That's the way in. And if we can help you make that decision this evening, let us know. Maybe you have some things you need to think over. Go ahead and think them over. But try to have the view that you're going to make the right choice, as Moses did, as Christ did, as many others who live on the earth have done. Even if there is persecution and affliction with the people of God, don't discount the reward that is set before us. Jesus did not. He endured because of the reward and the joy set before him. If we can help you in these matters, choose the only way there is to go to heaven, through Jesus Christ. And if you need to, come while we stand and while we sing.